Hey, this is Joe from Broken Paintbrush. I am put together a video tutorial on how to use advanced editing in GIMP to bring out the most in your models from your photography setup. Who is this for? This is for those people who all they have for the photo box is a piece of paper against a wall, a couple lamps sitting next to it. Camera kind of, your smartphone, whatever basic camera you have. I'm going to show you how to take that basic setup and make the most of it with some editing with a free tool called GIMP. Now, this tool isn't meant, at least my tutorial for this tool isn't meant as a way to enhance your model or show things that aren't actually there. All I'm trying to show you is how to make what you have painted, the hard work you have done on your model, come to life in photography to show others what you've made. So what we learned in this. So last tutorial I showed you how to do some basic editing, cropping, auto white balance, auto color enhance. This episode, I will show you how to do that manually. How to fine tune it, to do power settings, things like that, that can actually bring out a little bit more and adjust it a bit. We'll then go into how to do some fuzzy color select to select color areas of the picture, be able to edit just those areas and enhance the background, the different colors, bring them back out a little bit more than the photography is showing. We'll then go into how to add a watermark so you can claim the picture as your own and be able to get it ready for posting it to your blog. So I hope all this helps, and let's jump in.
Alright, so you can see here we now have the orc Defcopta. He was shot in just a white piece of paper folded up against a wall with some lights. I've cropped it down to the dimensions of the copter, as I showed in the beginning videos for the editing with GIMP. Here we're just going to try, what does the auto balance do, as I showed before, and let's see if we could even try the auto color enhance. Alright, so that adds a little bit of color, brings out a little bit, but you'll notice on this guy, the pilot himself is pretty dark, and the background is still on the yellow side, and you get these lines that this paper had a little bit of texture in it, which didn't realize it looking at it until take pictures and they magically show up. So that's why I'm using it for this more advanced version of the GIMP. So what we're going to start with is the manual adjusting the colors. Go back up here and we'll go to levels. This tool shows a pretty big histogram here. This kind of looks scary, but all it is showing how much light is in the picture, how much dark is in the picture, and kind of everywhere in between. With a big white background, you usually see this pretty high, but it's basically a way for us to manually kind of cut it in. If you don't do the auto tools, this curve is a nice kind of solid curve. The auto tools are kind of where it's manually going and doing all these micro adjustments throughout. So that's why you see it kind of sharp and jagged in there. Alright, so what is this big scary tool? Well, it's really as simple as these little sliders at the bottom. This little slider, if you move it to the left, you see that it lightens up the picture. It sets the white threshold, the lightness. And so the more we move it over, the brighter the image gets, but you also notice the colors start to get washed out a little bit. Opposite side, kind of does the opposite side. It sets the black threshold, and so you start bringing it over here, it gets darker. Now, while it gets darker, the colors have a little bit more depth. Because you see if we bring it back, the colors kind of start getting washed out from where they are. So it's a little bit of trade-off between the two. Now the middle slider kind of sets what would be the neutral gray. And so you can bring it this way and you can start kind of graying out the picture a little bit more, but you can see it creates a little bit more unified brightness to the picture. The pilot's a little brighter, but not everything else is too bright. You go this opposite way, it goes the opposite way, it kind of darkens everything. Not very useful for this picture. Just hit reset, brings everything back to the beginning, the starting place. The output level underneath is kind of the same thing, but it's setting the threshold at which the white is cut off. And so here we're cutting off what is white. Bring it a little bit darker, a little bit darker, a little bit darker. So we're not setting what is white, it's saying what point do we start not including anything brighter than that. Same thing with the bottom side. We can kind of pull this up, say we don't really want to include anything darker than this. So you notice it kind of brings everything up. So with all that, to edit this copter, generally what I do is I bring in the lightness a little bit so we can start seeing more of the the orc in top, I usually bring up the black just a little bit just to create a little bit more depth to it. But then for this guy to bring out the orc a little bit more, we're going to have to bring this threshold down just a little bit to kind of even it all up. So now the pilot is a little more visible. The colors have started to wash out, but they're not too bad. And overall, you can see a lot more detail in it than if we turn off the preview there. So with that, we have now edited the picture to include a little bit better view of what the orc looks like on there. But he's clearly not finished. So if we wanted to show off a little bit more, obviously we could bring out a little bit more lightness. We're just going to use that for example for this step. You can then come back up, and sometimes you can go back into color enhance, and sometimes it pops out the colors just a little bit more. It's a way to edit using a little bit more manual selection. We'll come back and try and clean up this a little bit more, but wanted to show you the other tool that you can use. It's a little bit more of a power user tool called curves. So in here, it's kind of shows the same type of histogram, but now instead of a slider, you got this kind of diagonal curve crossed. And if you bring it up here and bring it down there and bring it up here, you can adjust different micro things. It's basically what it's doing for all these little sawtooths in there. It's doing this on a micro level for you. What I usually use this for is if it's tint. So if there's a slight green tint, slight red tint, what you can do is this value is here. You can click on the red and we can slightly adjust it, this way or that way. You can see that removes some of the red there, brought some of the red up. We can really see if we, see this is adding a little bit of red. So there's also a way if you want to increase some of the red up here. We also notice the metallics also look a little extra red now because I brought this up. If I bring it back down, I'm kind of removing a little bit of the red from the picture. It's with it and without it. So you can see as we currently look, this is a little bit red. If we add this filter in, it now looks a little bit more blue, a little more green. And so that's what you can do if you have some slight tint because of the camera, the lights. Like that, we can also bring the green down if we want, obviously make a little purple doing that. So power user tool, I don't use it often. The next tool we are going to use is, we'll notice that the area here is still a little on the yellow side. We still got this kind of stuff. So what we're going to use is this fuzzy select. Now fuzzy select is kind of like a select all of an area tool. It's a little magic wand. So if we just click up here, you can see it selected all of this, and all this dotted line is it tried to select areas in here, but it couldn't quite match the colors. You see it selected around all of the details here, down to here where it starts to change colors again. Now what we can do to change what it's selecting is there's this threshold. If we set it really high, we'll exaggerate here, it's now going in, and that's obviously coming up. It's coming into up into here. It's selecting in some of there a little bit. That was way too high, so we'll readjust in here. There we go. So now it's getting, don't see all the little spots in here, but it's not coming in and selecting any of the orc yet. But then obviously it's getting stuck down here in the other colors. To be able to select a little bit more, we can shift changes it. The cursor adds a plus sign, and control adds a minus sign. So that's obviously adding to the select. So that just added a whole bunch more, and control would subtract. So now that we've shifted, we brought all this back in, except some little dots in here, but we'll take care of that in a second. Now what you notice is that spots inside these openings don't. Why? Because it only selects up to the edge. It's trying to find edges. So if we want to color those too, we can just shift, select it in, shift, select it in, select it in. So then we just kind of look around, look for some holes between there. All right, so one thing you might have noticed is when I got that one, is back here, it was a little too aggressive along the silver areas. Thought the silver was a little too white. So that's where we'll come to the next set of tools where we actually want to remove some of that selection. Now sometimes you can just use the rectangle tool and just do a control, select, and that is removing it. But then you kind of have to kind of go around and do this funny business, and now you see that the select edges are rather funny looking. So instead what we can do is use this lasso tool. This allows you to draw a freeform selection, and you can follow this around, still holding down the control key key because we don't want to, so we want to remove this from the selected selection. Just following the edge until we get back to you. There. So now you see it cleaned up all of that. We still left this, you know, there's a little bit there, but that's detail that I won't do in this video. We can add in this side, kind of go around the edge, and we want to make sure that it's not trying to pull in colors, areas that we actually care about. You can go around and make sure it's all the pieces you want are selected, all the pieces you aren't, like this missile, you know, remove all those. And here I'll show you why we're doing that. So in theory, we have all the kind of this white, yellow selected, but last thing I'll show you is we have some of these still dots down there of things. Sure, we can use the lasso tool, things like that. We could use the lasso tool to bring this in, but sometimes it's easier to just go select, grow. Now what this is doing is, it's on the other screen, grows all your selection by 1 pixel. And so all these select areas just will move in by a single pixel. And it basically got rid of all those dots. There's a couple tiny ones here, but I won't worry about those for this. So it's a kind of a way to bring it in, and we'll use that in a second as we're editing to shrink it back down and kind of soften the effect we're about to do. So what we're going to do is kind of go back in and go back to the levels. Here we are. See, it's almost all white and nothing in the black. So what we're going to do is just bring this down, and we could bring it all the way down, and now everything's pretty solid white in the background. But if you look closely after we unselected all this, it'd be pretty harsh transition in here from some places. So what we're going to do instead is we're just going to bring it down a little bit. Bring it down a little bit on the white side, gray it out a bit, because you notice if we do this way, it also does that. So reset that and bring it just up a couple clicks, bring you down a couple clicks. It's more towards the white, but it's not super white yet. This is where we're going to come back, click OK, come back to the select and shrink. This is going to do the exact opposite of the grow, and we want to shrink it by 1 pixel. So now all of this area that we've selected, it's now slightly further out. We can just redo this levels, move this down a couple, click OK, shrink, keeps moving to the other screen, and we can just do this a few times depending on how well you want to transition. We'll do it one more time and then I'll show you what we're doing here. It's just a little bit bigger. All right, so now we can do Control A to select everything. So now if we zoom in on some of these edges, you still see there's some of these ridges. We'll have to go back and clean that up. But it's not a hard transition from kind of the right along this edge. It's a little blurry, but it's not a pixelated issue as if we just did a select here. Just did a real harsh transition. I selected the gray. So now if we zoom back in, you see it's kind of a harsh in here a little bit. And so just by doing that select grow adds a little bit of a softer transition from your model back into the background. So now that we've brought most of the background out of the way, cleaned it up, brought some of the colors back out, now we still have these little spots down here, the shadows underneath the base and some specks in the background. What are we going to do about that? Well, we have two tools that I like to use. One is this smudge tool, and it does exactly what it sounds like. It just smudges things around. It just blurs it in. So for little specks, you can just kind of rub it in, make it disappear, and clean it up. Nice and simple. So in places like that, it's super quick. Just kind of blur it into the background. You know, kind of clean up some of this edge here so it's not as jarring shadows there. But then over here, if we try and smudge that in, like sure, it'll make it a little bit, it'll get rid of the ridges and make it a little more of a shadow, a little cleaner. But you still have a dark area that maybe you want to get rid of because you know, you're a perfectionist, you want it Just don't want the shadow in there. So the other tool we use is clone tool. This is really helpful if instead of just a pure white or black background, you also had a background that had a little bit more texture to it, a little bit more going on, like some of the Hanger 18 backdrops, that you want to follow a texture, a pattern as you go. And so what this clone tool does is if you hold Control and click somewhere, it now sets this marker. And so anywhere you go and you hold down and go, it will start cloning from the original position over to where you currently are. So if we click here and I start dragging in here, I'm now cloning into that dark area, and we can just kind of clean it up. You know, obviously in this case, it's basically just cloning the white on top of the white, and it's not doing a whole lot. But again, if there's different color gradients in here, having something that you're cloning right next to where you're wanting to paint or paint over allows you to copy that texture and that color right onto where you're going. For an example, let's say, you know, this spot on here was actually not there, it was on the camera or something. So we can clone here and just paint right over it, and just the rocks just kind of paint right over themselves. You know, obviously that was actually a paint splat that I had missed on the model, but so that goes against a little bit what I was talking about earlier, but I just wanted to find an example for you to see what I was talking about there. Alright, so the next thing I want to share with you is how to create a watermark. First off, why? So I like creating watermarks on my pictures so that way as they get shared around, people can see that it was some of my work, and it's kind of like an artist signature on the photograph itself. People use it for other things. It just tries to help keep people from copying it and claiming it as their own, which there are some dark corners of our interweb that people do naughty things like this. So adding a watermark just helps clarify who was the original artist and give them credit. So to do this, you want to create a picture in another file and have a transparent background. For mine, I have a little bit of white texture background just to offset the black and some of the paint splatter that I use as my watermark. So this was created in another file as a GIMP format, and then exported down to a PNG file. The PNG file, rather than a JPEG, allows this transparent layer to stay there and hold it as I copy into another file. It's a little bit on the bigger side, so it doesn't work great as a picture to upload to the web, but it serves our purpose here. Now that we have this picture open in this other thing, we can just do a select all on it, copy it, come back over to our picture and paste it. And boom, now we have this giant watermark right in the middle of our picture. Clearly not where you want, unless of course you're on one of those sites that prevents you from copying it unless you pay or something. That's not what we're going for here. So we want to move it. What you can do is click the watermark and you can drag it all around. If you notice, you go off the watermark, the icon cursor turns into an anchor. That's basically if you click, it's going to anchor it to your background. So we don't want to do that yet until we're ready to position it. You want to move back on until it goes back to move cursor. So I put mine down in the bottom corner, so I drag it down there. Now it's clearly on the big side. So what we can do is go up to layer, scale layer. This is going to scale only this floating layer, as GIMP calls it, of what we just pasted in. So it's currently 1000 by 400. That's about twice as big as I want there. So if I change that to 500, it'll automatically scale that side and we hit scale. That's a lot better to where I like to have it. We could just now click it, anchor it. The other thing I like is I want my watermark there, but I don't want it too distracting. So what I do is I come up to the opacity layer, scale this down so it's now a little more transparent to the background. Kind of the white disappears into the white. This starts to show some of the background through. So you see it there, but it's more of a watermark rather than a stamp. Now that it's in this range where I like it, now I can click the anchor, flattens it, and I can save this and export it as my JPEG to upload to a blog. Now, a quick tip and trick. If you're doing a whole bunch of pictures, bringing them up, stamping them, all that, one of the things you want to do is before copying and pasting the watermark in, so we'll just get rid of it here, is pre-scale your image. So go to image, scale image. I like images around 1000 or so. So now that we pre-scaled it, what you'd want to do is all of your images be about the same size. So 1000 width, 1000 height, whatever you end up selecting, make sure if we're doing this batch processing, having them about the same size. Then we come back over to here and we remember that the image was about twice the size as it was before, but since we shrunk the picture a little bit, probably want to shrink this a little bit more. So let's just pre-shrink this to 400 and transparency to 80. This is what I had. So now when I copy and paste it over here, notice it's already pre-shrunk and it's already pre-transparent. So all I have to do is bring it down. It's already saved me a few steps. And so if I'm doing this for 10 pictures for a photo session, tutorial, whatever it happens to be, it's much simpler. It's a few more steps per image. So I just anchor it in and it's ready to go.